They sent the ugly daughter as a mail-order bride joke. The cowboy chose her. Jack Reynolds had always known the quiet life of the ranch. His days began long before sunrise, when the horizon glowed with pale shades of pink and gold. The smell of fresh hay, the earthy scent of the cattle pens, and the chill of morning air had been constants in his life for as long as he could remember. Life on the ranch was not easy, but it was honest, and it suited him. Jack liked simplicity. He liked work that left his hands rough and his body tired, knowing he had done something real. But despite all of the comfort his routines brought, there was a deep, quiet loneliness that settled over him each evening. He had friends in town, sure, people who came and went with the seasons, stopping by for a drink at the small country bar or a brief chat over the fence. But friendships could not fill the emptiness that lingered in the quiet moments at night. Jack had never married. He had known women, yes, a few here and there, but none had stayed. Something about the life he led, the early mornings, the endless chores, the unpredictable work with the cattle, made it hard for most women to stay interested. And perhaps Jack thought sometimes it was not just the ranch life that scared them. Maybe it was him. He was stubborn, practical, and simple-minded in ways that didn't always charm others, yet he had hope. Not loud, not demanding, just a soft hope that one day someone might come along who could understand the rhythm of his life and enjoy it. One quiet afternoon, as Jack sorted hay bales near the barn, a letter arrived in the mail. It was unusual to receive anything except bills and the occasional flyer, so the envelope caught his attention. The handwriting was careful, neat, and precise, unlike anything Jack saw from the rest of the town. With a sense of curiosity, he tore it open and unfolded the letter. Alongside it was a photograph. Jack squinted at the image. It was of a young woman sitting in a chair, dressed modestly in a simple dress. Her hair was pulled back neatly and her hands rested in her lap. There was nothing glamorous about her, nothing that screamed the kind of beauty one might expect in a magazine. But there was something in her eyes, a quiet steadiness, a hint of gentleness that made him pause. The letter explained that she was a mail-order bride, arranged by a wealthy family who lived far away. Jack chuckled under his breath as he read. Something about the tone of the letter seemed off, almost joking. He looked at the photograph again. Something told him this wasn't the usual prank letters he sometimes received from friends trying to entertain themselves. And yet, he couldn't help but notice the awkward charm in her smile, a smile that didn't seem to belong to someone trying to trick him. He carried the photo in his pocket for a day, looking at it when he had a moment alone, thinking about what it might mean. A mail-order bride, someone sent by a family from a distant city who he had never met, hoping to marry him. It sounded ridiculous at first. Yet there was a strange pull, a feeling he couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was loneliness, but the thought of meeting her made the long, quiet evenings feel slightly less empty. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Margaret Hughes was preparing for a journey she had never expected. Her family was wealthy and proud, and she had always been aware of their tendency for sharp humor, sometimes cruel in ways that left lasting marks. They had chosen her for this prank, believing it would be amusing to send her to a man who lived on a remote ranch, expecting shock, ridicule, or outright rejection. Margaret knew nothing of this cruel intent. She only knew she was being sent to start a new life, a life where she might finally belong somewhere beyond the endless expectations of her own family. She packed her belongings carefully. A small suitcase contained her few treasured possessions, a diary, some dresses, a photograph of her late mother, and a few simple trinkets. Margaret had grown up learning that appearances mattered more than kindness, that charm often outweighed substance. She had been told often that she was pretty enough to draw attention or admiration, that her quiet manners and soft voice were no match for the world's harshness. But she also knew, deep in her heart, that she had value. She was kind, she was thoughtful, she was intelligent, and she had a sense of humor that could brighten even the dullest days. Margaret was ready for a new chapter, unaware that the path ahead might be paved with humiliation or surprise. The journey was long, crossing vast plains, dusty highways, and empty stretches of land that seemed to go on forever. Margaret's heart raced with a mixture of excitement and fear. She wondered about the man she would meet, about what he would think, and whether he would see her as more than a joke. She kept imagining the worst: laughter, ridicule, cold rejection. But she also imagined the possibility that someone might look at her and see who she truly was. That possibility, small and fragile, kept her going. Back on the ranch, Jack began making preparations for her arrival, half expecting the moment to be awkward, half dreading it, and half looking forward to it with an unspoken curiosity. He cleaned the guest room, dusted the surfaces, and even mended a few old curtains. He hadn't had a guest in months, not someone who would stay overnight, and the thought made him both nervous and strangely excited. He wondered if he would recognize anything in her, the gentleness in her voice, the sincerity in her eyes, the quiet strength he imagined a woman like her must carry. The day of her arrival, Jack found himself pacing in the early morning light. His horse whinnied in the distance, and the sun rose slowly, painting the sky with warm tones of orange and lavender. Each sound, each shadow, seemed amplified by the anticipation that buzzed in the air. When he finally heard the approaching carriage, Jack's heart thumped loudly, more from nerves than from surprise. He wondered if he would know how to act, if he would be awkward or awkwardly polite. He reminded himself to breathe, to smile, and to remember that she was just a person like him, arriving in search of connection. Margaret stepped out of the carriage gracefully, her hands steady despite the obvious tension in her shoulders. She glanced around, taking in the sprawling ranch, the grazing cattle, and the rustic charm of the farmhouse. Her eyes met Jack's, and for a moment there was silence. No words were exchanged, just a meeting of two worlds, two lives that had unknowingly been sent toward each other. Jack studied her carefully. There was no grandiose beauty, no flashy charm, no immediate spark of attraction the way people wrote about in stories. But he noticed the honesty in her posture, the sincerity in her gaze, and the quiet confidence she carried despite obvious nerves. Something about her presence felt genuine, something that seemed to resonate with the life he had built alone. He felt a strange sense of relief, not embarrassment, not shock, but curiosity and a soft, unexpected admiration. Margaret returned his gaze and smiled, a small, almost tentative smile, but there was warmth in it, a sign that she was aware of the tension but also willing to bridge it with kindness. Jack felt an unfamiliar feeling rise in his chest. Perhaps it was hope, or perhaps it was recognition, the recognition that sometimes things were not what they seemed. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, painting long shadows across the fields, Jack offered Margaret a seat inside the farmhouse. She accepted gracefully, her movements careful and deliberate. Over simple tea and bread, they began to talk, sharing small details about their lives. Jack spoke of the ranch, the work, and the quiet routines that filled his days. Margaret shared her journey, the excitement and trepidation of traveling so far from home, and the desire she had for a place to belong. Though the conversation was cautious, there was a spark, an unspoken understanding that grew with each shared word. Jack noticed how attentive she was, how she listened not just with her ears but with her heart. Margaret noticed how Jack, despite his gruff exterior, had patience and depth that was rare and compelling. They laughed softly at small misunderstandings, nodded in agreement at shared observations, and began to feel the first gentle threads of connection. For Jack, it was a revelation. He had expected a joke, a cruel twist, or a failed attempt at a match. Instead, he found someone who was real, someone who carried her own strength quietly, someone whose presence made the emptiness in his home seem a little less vast. For Margaret, it was the first time in her life that she felt seen for who she was rather than judged by superficial expectations. She felt cautious optimism, a hope that perhaps the journey she had undertaken, no matter the reason, might lead her to something meaningful. As night fell over the ranch, the first day of their acquaintance ended quietly. Outside, the stars began to twinkle, tiny sparks of light over the vast, dark landscape. Inside, a sense of possibility lingered, fragile yet undeniable. Two strangers, sent together by chance, cruelty, and fate, had begun a journey neither could have predicted. And in the quiet of the night, as Jack prepared for bed and Margaret settled into the guest room, both of them felt a small, growing certainty that this meeting, unexpected and unusual as it was, might be the beginning of something remarkable, something real, something worth waiting for. The next morning, the ranch woke up under a soft, golden sunrise, the kind that made the earth smell warm and alive. Jack Reynolds rose early, as he always did, but today the routine felt different. There was a quiet excitement in the air, a small tension in his chest that made the early hours feel unusually important. He stepped outside, boots crunching on the gravel, and surveyed the ranch. The fences, the grazing cattle, the fields stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Everything seemed ordinary, yet everything felt charged with possibility. Margaret Hughes would be joining him for breakfast soon, and he wasn't quite sure what to expect from this strange, arranged meeting. Inside the farmhouse, Margaret had been awake before dawn as well. The small guest room with its soft quilt and simple furnishings felt foreign yet comforting. She touched the folds of the quilt, thinking about how different life had been before this journey and how unpredictable the road ahead might be. Her heart pounded with nervous energy. She was stepping into a world that was completely new, a life where she had no guide and no guarantee of welcome. Yet there was also a thrill in the uncertainty, a small hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would see her for who she truly was. When Jack stepped into the kitchen, he found Margaret already there, standing near the window, her hands wrapped around a mug of steaming tea. She turned at the sound of his footsteps and offered him a tentative smile. It was small, shy even, but it held warmth. Jack returned the smile a little awkwardly, realizing that for the first time in years, he felt a stir of anticipation that had nothing to do with work or routine. "Good morning," Jack said, his voice low and careful. "Sleep well?" Margaret nodded. "Yes, thank you." "It's quiet here, peaceful," Jack chuckled softly. "Quiet is one word for it, sometimes too quiet." He hesitated, then added, "I hope you found the room comfortable enough." "It's lovely," Margaret said, her voice gentle. "Simple but comfortable," she paused. I appreciate you letting me stay here." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of her gratitude, though it seemed unnecessary. He motioned toward the small table where he had set out simple breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh fruit from the local market. "Sit, eat. You must be hungry after your journey." Margaret moved to the table, her movements careful and polite. She had been raised in a world of formality and expectation, but something about the ranch, the openness, the rough edges, the honesty of labor, made her feel both cautious and curious. She had expected judgment, ridicule, or perhaps indifference. Instead, she found a quiet man with a steady gaze, a presence that suggested patience rather than impatience, understanding rather than judgment. They ate in silence at first, the sounds of the ranch outside. The lowing of cattle, the creak of the old windmill, the rustle of leaves in the morning breeze, filling the space. Jack watched her out of the corner of his eye, noting the way she held herself, the careful attention she gave to her surroundings. She did not fidget nervously, nor did she seem overly formal. There was a quiet poise to her, a sense that she had endured hardships and learned to carry herself with grace. "So," Jack began, breaking the silence, "you came a long way. I imagine it's quite different here than what you're used to." Margaret nodded slowly. "Very different. But not unpleasant, it feels real." She smiled faintly. "Not everything is polished or artificial. There's honesty in the work, in the land, in the people. I like that." Jack felt a spark of appreciation. "You notice that, huh?" He smiled, a little more easily now. "Most people just look at the dust and complain." Margaret laughed softly, the sound light and melodic, carrying a warmth that seemed to brighten the kitchen. "Perhaps I'm not most people," she said, tilting her head slightly. "I like seeing things as they are, not as I'm told they should be." The conversation began to flow more naturally after that. Jack found himself curious about her past, asking gently about the city she had grown up in, the work she had done, the little details of her daily life. Margaret answered honestly, though cautiously, careful not to overshare too soon. She spoke of her family, the expectations that had always weighed heavily on her, and the quiet dreams she had kept to herself. Jack listened with genuine interest, occasionally nodding, occasionally asking another question that showed he was paying attention. As the morning passed, Jack decided to show her around the ranch. He led her out the back door, past the barn where the cattle were grazing, past the fenced paddocks, and finally to the open fields that stretched toward the horizon. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows on the ground, highlighting the rugged beauty of the landscape. "This is where most of the work happens," Jack said, gesturing to the fields. "Cattle, crops, fences, it's not glamorous, but it's honest work, and it keeps me busy." Margaret followed him, taking in the vastness of the land, the smell of the soil, the sound of wind through the tall grass. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Different from what I imagined, but beautiful." Jack smiled. "Most people don't see it that way at first. They see the dust, the heat, the sweat, but it has its own kind of beauty if you know where to look." Margaret nodded, looking out over the fields. I think I understand. There's something steady here, something reliable. It feels safe. Jack felt a warmth rise in his chest at her words. It wasn't often that someone understood the quiet satisfaction of life on the ranch. Most people saw only the hardships, the isolation, the monotony. But Margaret seemed to see deeper, to understand the rhythm of his life, the satisfaction that came from hard work, from living close to the land. As they walked back toward the farmhouse, a small mishap occurred. A young calf had wandered too close to the fence and gotten its legs stuck. Jack acted quickly, but Margaret moved to help as well, her hands steady and sure as they worked together to free the animal. Jack was impressed, not just by her courage but by her instinct to act without hesitation, to step into a difficult situation calmly and efficiently. "You handled that well," Jack said once the calf was safe, brushing dust from his hands. Margaret smiled, a little embarrassed. "I've dealt with animals before, not cattle exactly, but I understand responsibility." Jack nodded appreciatively. "It's not just about strength, it's about patience and care. You have both." That afternoon, they returned to the house, tired from the morning but energized by the shared experience. Jack had expected awkwardness, perhaps tension, but instead there was a growing camaraderie, a sense that they were beginning to understand each other. Over lunch, they talked more openly, sharing stories from their pasts, laughing at small anecdotes, and discovering little quirks in each other that made them smile. As the day turned into evening, Jack realized how much he had enjoyed her company. There was a simplicity in her presence, a comfort in the way she listened, a warmth in the way she responded. Margaret, too, felt a sense of relief. She had feared rejection, ridicule, or disappointment, but instead she found someone patient, kind, and unexpectedly attentive. The foundation of trust and connection was slowly being built, brick by brick, with honesty and shared experience. When night fell, Jack offered to show her the stars. They stepped outside into the cool evening air, the sky a deep velvet sprinkled with countless points of light. The vastness of the universe above mirrored the vastness of the land below, and both of them felt a small sense of wonder. "You see this often?" Margaret asked, her voice soft. "Every clear night," Jack said, "but it never gets old, makes you feel small but also alive." Margaret nodded, taking it in. "It's beautiful, peaceful." Jack hesitated for a moment, then spoke quietly. "I wasn't sure what to expect when you arrived. I thought it might be a joke or awkward, but it's not. It's good. Having you here, talking with you, it feels right." Margaret looked at him, her expression a mixture of surprise and warmth. "I feel the same," she admitted. "I didn't know what to expect, but I feel welcome. I feel seen." Jack felt a swell of emotion he had rarely allowed himself to notice. It was not romance, not yet, but it was something equally powerful: connection, understanding, recognition. They stood together quietly, the stars above, the vast fields around them, and the shared realization that something meaningful had begun, something neither of them had anticipated. As they returned to the house, both felt a sense of anticipation for the days ahead. There would be challenges, misunderstandings, moments of tension, but there was also the promise of discovery, of companionship, of slowly learning to trust one another. And in that quiet, profound moment, both understood that the journey they had begun yesterday was only the first step toward something extraordinary. The night ended with a quiet sense of hope. Two strangers, sent together under unusual circumstances, had begun to find common ground, respect, and understanding. And though neither knew what the future would bring, they both knew one thing. The unexpected meeting of their lives had already started to change them, in ways they could not yet fully understand, but in ways that felt undeniably real. The days that followed were a blend of hard work, quiet moments, and slowly growing companionship. Jack Reynolds woke early as always, the rising sun spilling golden light over the wide, open fields. Margaret Hughes had settled into a routine as well, rising with the light, helping with breakfast, and joining Jack for small tasks around the ranch. At first it had been awkward. She fumbled with the tools, misjudged the strength needed to lift hay bales, and struggled to manage the stubborn animals. But she persevered with patience and a gentle determination that impressed Jack more than he cared to admit. Jack, who had lived his life in the rhythm of routine, found himself noticing small things about Margaret. The way her hands moved when she handled a rope, the careful precision with which she fed the cattle, and the way she paused to notice details others might overlook. The curve of a fence, the patterns in the clouds, the way a calf rested its head against a mother. At first, he thought it was just curiosity, a fleeting interest in the stranger who had arrived at his ranch. But slowly, it became something more, a quiet admiration that lingered in his chest long after the work was done. Margaret, for her part, began to understand the rhythm of the ranch. She learned when to move quickly and when patience was required. She discovered the quirks of the animals, the way the cows would respond to certain calls, how a stubborn horse could be guided with gentle persistence, and how a well-timed gesture could calm even the most anxious calf. Every day she grew more confident, her awkwardness fading into a quiet competence that surprised even herself. She had expected ridicule or frustration, but Jack's responses were always calm, sometimes amused, and always encouraging. "You're improving," Jack said one morning, watching her guide a calf back into the pen. "You've got a knack for it. I didn't think you would, not at first." Margaret smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm learning." "It's different from what I've done before, but I think I like it," Jack nodded. "It's not easy work, but it's honest. You either learn or get frustrated. You're learning." Margaret laughed softly. "I suppose so. Though some days I feel like the animals are teaching me more than I'm teaching them." Jack chuckled. "Maybe that's how it should be. Life's like that. You learn from the world around you if you're paying attention." As the days passed, their conversations deepened. During breaks, they would sit under the shade of a large oak tree, sharing stories from their pasts. Jack spoke of his childhood on the ranch, the long hours learning to handle cattle, and the quiet joy of working close to the land. He spoke sparingly, not because he had nothing to say, but because he had rarely felt the need to share his thoughts with anyone. Margaret listened, asking gentle questions that revealed her curiosity without judgment. Margaret spoke of her own life, of the expectations placed on her by her family, and the small rebellions of thought and action she had quietly performed. She spoke of her dreams, simple dreams of living with honesty, kindness, and dignity, far from the pressures of appearances and social approval. Jack listened quietly, noticing how sincere she was, how every word carried a piece of truth that made her presence more compelling than any photograph or description could convey. One afternoon, as they worked together to repair a broken fence, a sudden rainstorm swept across the ranch. The clouds darkened, the wind picked up, and raindrops began to fall, drumming against the roof of the barn and the wide leaves of nearby trees. Jack and Margaret scrambled to secure the animals, guiding the cattle into covered areas and tying down loose equipment. Margaret's sleeves were rolled up, her hair damp from the rain, but she moved with steady efficiency, her fear of the storm overcome by practicality and courage. "You're brave in this weather," Jack said later as they both huddled under the shelter of the barn, laughing despite being soaked. Margaret shrugged, a small smile on her face. "I guess I have to be. There's no other choice." Jack studied her, realizing that her bravery wasn't loud or boastful. It was quiet, reliable, and steady, a reflection of the resilience he had begun to admire. "You handle yourself well," he said quietly. "Not many people could do what you just did." Margaret's smile softened and she looked down at her hands, still wet from the rain. "I want to try. I want to be useful. I want to belong." Jack felt a pang of emotion, though he didn't say it aloud. There was something in her words, a vulnerability wrapped in quiet strength, that touched him deeply. He realized that belonging in this vast, empty place was something they could create together if only they were willing to understand and respect each other. As the weeks went by, the townspeople began to notice the unusual pair. Whispers spread through the small community, some curious, some skeptical. A few remarked on the mail-order bride, arriving under strange circumstances. Others speculated on the relationship developing between the quiet cowboy and the young woman who had come so far. Jack ignored most of it. He had never cared much for gossip or judgment, and he certainly wasn't going to let it affect the way he treated Margaret. Margaret, too, tried to pay it little attention, though it was impossible not to feel a twinge of anxiety at times. Despite the small pressures from the town, their bond continued to grow. They learned to anticipate each other's movements, finishing tasks together with a quiet efficiency that surprised both of them. Margaret began to add her own touches to the daily routines, preparing meals with thoughtful care, arranging small details around the house, and even planting a modest garden near the farmhouse. Jack watched her work, noticing not only her skill but the pride she took in creating something meaningful. One evening, after a long day of repairing fences and tending the animals, they sat together on the porch, sipping warm tea. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the air rich with the scent of earth and grass after a brief shower. Silence settled over them, comfortable and companionable, as if the world beyond the ranch had disappeared entirely. "You've changed things here," Jack said quietly. "Not the ranch itself, but everything else. It feels lighter." Margaret looked at him, surprised. "I didn't mean to change anything." "You have," Jack said, smiling faintly. "I didn't know I needed it, but I did. I didn't realize how heavy life had been until you arrived." Margaret's eyes softened and she looked down at her hands. "I didn't know I could make a difference," she admitted. "I was just hoping to belong, to feel useful." "You already are," Jack said simply. "More than you know." In that moment, the unspoken understanding between them deepened. It wasn't love yet, not in the way the stories told, but it was trust, respect, and a growing recognition of each other's worth. They had begun to see each other clearly, not as a prank, not as a stranger, but as someone real, someone dependable, someone capable of connection. Over time, Margaret's presence became indispensable to the rhythm of the ranch. She was no longer a guest or a newcomer. She was part of the daily life, part of the routines and rhythms that defined Jack's world. She learned the names of each animal, the habits of the herd, and even the quirks of the tools and machinery that Jack had relied on for years. Jack, in turn, learned to rely on her insight, her careful observations, and her thoughtful suggestions. One day, as they worked together in the fields, Jack paused and looked at Margaret. "You've come a long way since you first arrived," he said. Margaret laughed softly. "I've learned from the best," she replied, a hint of pride in her voice. Jack shook his head, smiling. "No, I've learned from you, more than I expected, more than I realized." Margaret's face softened and she felt a quiet warmth in her chest. For the first time in her life, she felt not only competent but valued, respected, and seen. She realized that this connection, built over weeks of shared work, conversation, and quiet understanding, was something rare and precious. As the days turned into weeks, small moments of intimacy emerged. A shared laugh over a stubborn calf, a quiet conversation under the stars, a hand brushed against another while mending a fence. Each moment was careful, unforced, and gentle, a testament to the trust and respect growing between them. They began to understand that true companionship was not built on grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but on the steady accumulation of shared experiences, mutual respect, and unwavering presence. And in that slow, deliberate way, the bond between Jack and Margaret deepened. The prank that had brought her to the ranch became irrelevant, a distant shadow compared to the reality of their connection. They were no longer two strangers brought together by circumstance. They were two people beginning to understand what it meant to rely on another, to care for another, and to create a life together that was honest, real, and meaningful. By the end of the season, the ranch had changed in more ways than one. Not just the repaired fences or thriving crops, but the presence of Margaret, a gentle, steadfast companion who had transformed the rhythm of Jack's days, the warmth of the farmhouse, and the sense of possibility in the air. And though neither spoke of love aloud, it was there in the quiet understanding, the small gestures, and the growing certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. The following weeks passed with a steady rhythm, the kind that comes from shared work, mutual respect, and growing familiarity. Jack Reynolds and Margaret Hughes had settled into a comfortable pattern, their days filled with ranch chores, simple meals, and quiet conversations under the open sky. The seasons were changing, and with each passing day their companionship deepened, though neither had yet dared to speak the word love. What they shared was something more subtle, more enduring: trust, understanding, and the unspoken knowledge that they could rely on each other. Yet life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Margaret's family. The envelope was familiar, the same formal, precise handwriting as before, but the tone this time was different. Jack handed it to Margaret as she returned from tending the garden, her hands dirtied but steady, her face calm despite the anticipation in her eyes. "It's from your family," Jack said simply, trying to hide his curiosity. "Do you want to open it?" Margaret took a deep breath, fingers brushing the envelope as though it were fragile. "Yes," she said softly, "I should." She tore it open carefully and began to read. Her face changed as she scanned the words, first confusion, then surprise, and finally a faint shadow of anger. Jack watched quietly, not wanting to interrupt, knowing that whatever was written would affect her deeply. Margaret finished reading and looked up, her eyes meeting his. They sent me here as a joke," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "They thought it would be funny to see me embarrass myself, to see me rejected." She paused, taking a deep breath. "They never expected anyone would actually see me, the real me." Jack felt a surge of anger, not at her, but at the cruel prank that had brought her here. "I don't care what they thought," he said firmly. "It doesn't matter what your family imagined. You're here and you're real, and that's all that counts." Margaret's eyes softened, a mixture of relief and gratitude. "I wasn't sure what to expect when I arrived," she admitted. "I feared humiliation, rejection, even ridicule, but instead," she looked down, smiling faintly, "instead I found someone who treats me like I matter." Jack nodded. "You do matter more than you know." The revelation of the prank spread through the small town eventually, as neighbors discovered the truth. Some laughed, some whispered, but most were surprised by Jack's reaction. Many had assumed he would be angry or embarrassed, but he remained calm, quietly supportive of Margaret and protective of her dignity. Their connection, built over weeks of shared work and trust, was stronger than gossip or judgment. Margaret, too, felt a quiet triumph. The prank could not define her. She had proven to herself, and to the world, that her worth was not measured by appearances or the opinions of others, but by her strength, kindness, and perseverance. And she had found someone who saw that value clearly, someone who appreciated her for who she truly was. Life continued on the ranch, but now there was a new sense of confidence between them. They worked side by side, tending the cattle, repairing fences, planting crops, and sharing meals. Each task, no matter how small, became a shared experience, a testament to their growing partnership. Jack began to notice more than ever the subtle ways Margaret enhanced life on the ranch. The thoughtful organization of the kitchen, the gentle care of the animals, the small touches that made their home feel welcoming. Margaret, in turn, felt increasingly comfortable in her role. She no longer feared being awkward or inadequate. She had learned the rhythm of ranch life, understood the needs of the animals, and even anticipated Jack's routines and preferences. Her presence was no longer that of a newcomer or guest, but that of a partner, someone integral to the life they were building together. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset. The sky was painted in brilliant oranges and pinks, the clouds glowing like fire across the horizon. Silence settled over them, comfortable and complete, the kind that only comes after weeks of shared understanding. Jack broke the silence. "You know, I never expected any of this," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "I thought you might be someone I'd have to endure, but you've become, well, more than I imagined." Margaret looked at him, a faint blush warming her cheeks. "More than you imagined?" she repeated, curiosity and a touch of amusement in her voice. Jack smiled softly. "Yes, someone I enjoy being with, someone I trust, someone I can't imagine not having around." Margaret felt her heart lift at his words. She had feared rejection, had feared that the revelation of the prank would change everything, but Jack's sincerity reassured her. She reached out, brushing her hand against his, a small, deliberate gesture. "I feel the same," she said quietly. "You've shown me that I can belong somewhere, that I can be myself and still be valued." The weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, the bond between them strengthened. The townspeople began to notice the shift, not just in their relationship, but in the way Margaret carried herself. There was confidence in her steps, warmth in her interactions, and a subtle joy that had been absent before. Jack, too, felt a change within himself. He had lived alone for so long, relying only on routine and habit, that he had forgotten how fulfilling companionship could be. Margaret reminded him of the simple pleasures of connection, laughter, and shared understanding. Then came the day when Jack decided to confront the family prank directly. Margaret had been nervous about their reaction, worried that they might try to humiliate her again or dismiss the bond that had grown between them. But Jack, steady and determined, reassured her. "We'll handle it together," he said. "No one gets to define your worth but you, and no one gets to undermine what we have built here." When they visited her family, Jack's quiet strength and unwavering support made a powerful impression. The family had expected him to be angry, embarrassed, or dismissive, but instead, he stood calmly by Margaret's side, treating her with respect and dignity. He spoke clearly, without anger or bitterness, affirming Margaret's worth and their right to build a life together. Her family, confronted with the reality of their actions and the evident bond between Jack and Margaret, had little choice but to acknowledge the truth. Margaret had proven her independence, her strength, and her ability to forge meaningful connections. And Jack, steadfast and honorable, had demonstrated that their plan could not harm what was genuine between them. Returning to the ranch, Margaret felt a deep sense of relief and triumph. She had faced the challenges, endured the fear of ridicule, and emerged stronger, more confident, and valued. Jack, too, felt a quiet satisfaction. The relationship they had built was authentic, resilient, and full of potential. They had navigated the difficult beginnings and emerged with trust, respect, and an undeniable bond. Life settled into a comforting routine once again. Days were filled with meaningful work, laughter, and shared moments of quiet reflection. Nights were spent under the stars, talking softly, sharing hopes and dreams, and savoring the simple pleasure of companionship. Jack and Margaret had become partners in every sense, partners in work, in life, and in the journey of discovering one another. One crisp autumn morning, as they worked together in the fields, Jack paused and looked at Margaret. The leaves had begun to turn, painting the landscape in vibrant shades of red, orange, and gold. "I can't imagine my life without you now," he said, his voice low but steady. Margaret smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "I feel the same," she replied. "I didn't know it at first, but this is home. With you, I feel at home." Jack reached out, taking her hand in his, a simple gesture filled with meaning. "Then we'll make this our life. Together, no jokes, no pranks, no expectations, just us and whatever comes next." Margaret squeezed his hand gently. "Together," she echoed. The seasons continued to change, each day bringing new challenges and small joys. The ranch thrived, the animals flourished, and the farmhouse became a home full of warmth, laughter, and shared memories. Jack and Margaret's bond, forged in unexpected circumstances, had grown into a foundation strong enough to withstand anything. They learned that love was not just a fleeting feeling but a deliberate choice, nurtured through trust, patience, and unwavering support. And so, as the sun set over the vast fields, painting the sky in brilliant hues, Jack and Margaret stood side by side, watching the horizon. They had arrived together, uncertain and untested, but they remained together, strong, connected, and ready for whatever the future might bring. The prank that had started it all was now just a distant memory, insignificant compared to the life they had built. In its place was something enduring, love born of respect, friendship, and shared understanding. And in the quiet of the evening, with the stars beginning to shine overhead, they both knew one thing for certain. This was the life they were meant to share, a life full of hope, trust, and the simple, profound joy of belonging to one another.